Hello and welcome. Today our guest is Alexander Grace from Red Pill Interviews. Alexander, thank you for joining us. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Now I understand that today you're continuing your mission to explore the psychology behind male sexual preferences. Is that correct? That's right, though today we're going to talk about something a bit more broad. I want to explore the appeal behind the dominant-submissive dynamic and some of the Bdsm activities that come with it. For those in the audience who aren't aware, can you give us a quick summary of what you mean by Bdsm? Sure. The Bdsm acronym stands for Bondage and Discipline, Dominant Submissive, and Sadism Masochism. So whenever you see things like whips, gags, blindfolds, you're generally in Bdsm territory. Now, some men do enjoy being the submissive one, like being subject to a dominatrix, something like that. For most men, the fantasy involves being the dominant one in a sexual exchange. They like the power and the control. So why is that? What's behind this male fantasy to be in control and dominant in the bedroom while their partner is submissive and obedient? That can be answered in a number of different ways. The first is that it's the nature of masculine energy to be active and powerful. It's like when you watch a sport team overcoming the obstacles, beating the opposition and scoring a goal. That's what masculine energy does best. So in the context of intimacy, having sex with the girl is the goal? That's right, and there's something in the struggle that really appeals to the core of a man. Now obviously rape is abhorrent and should never be condoned in any context, but the truth is that lots of couples enjoy sexual play that features an element of the woman being overpowered by a stronger man. So is that what this dominant-submissive dynamic is all about? In a way, though, it's very complex. What's important to know at this stage is that lots of men find the idea of overpowering a woman and just taking what they want extremely arousing. This is one of the reasons that so many couples feature this sort of element in their sex lives, to give the man that experience of raw masculinity and reaching his goal, whatever the cost. But you're not advocating actually raping women or being violent. No, of course not. I'm talking about activities that take place within the context of consent. But I've heard that some men actually get turned on when they see images of violence against women. Now, I know that you come from a sex-positive point of view and you don't want men to be ashamed of their sexuality, but surely you agree that that aspect of male sexuality is problematic. No, I don't agree. It's completely natural. Sexuality and violence have always been linked in the male brain because they're both fueled by testosterone. That's why when a soldier has finished a battle and he's finished killing all of the enemy soldiers, he busies himself raping all of the women. It's what comes natural to him. But it sounds like you're encouraging men to give in to their instincts and start raping women. No, not at all. I'm just saying it's natural. It's part of your biology. It's nothing to be ashamed of. That doesn't mean that you can act on those instincts without any consideration of ethics or morals. Committing acts of violence and sexual assault are crimes, and rightfully so. But then, if you're not advocating that men actually act out these desires, what are you proposing men do? I'm proposing that they integrate these parts of themselves. It's like when Carl Jung talks about the shadow, or Jordan Peterson talks about the monster inside you, the dark aspect of your personality. Acknowledging that it's there doesn't mean acting it out. It means accepting that part of yourself and emotional integration. So, men should accept these parts of themselves, but never act upon them. Well, they can act them out, and millions of men do. It's just important to do it safely and with your partner's consent. But that's what the whole BDSM community is about. It's about providing a safe place for people to act out their most basic sexual desires and instincts. So is that all there is to it? The dominant-submissive dynamic is appealing to men because our sexuality is fueled by testosterone and our biology. Perhaps that's where it started, but it's become a lot more complex than that. To really understand this sexual preference, you need to look at the culture in which we live and the individual psychology of each man. Okay, so what do we need to know about the culture? That there are certain things considered to be immoral. Dominating women, insulting women, being violent towards women, ordering women about. These are sick and perverted pleasures, and they're born from toxic masculinity. And if you desire to do any of these things, then you're oppressing women and upholding the patriarchy. But those things are immoral, aren't they? There's a big difference between desiring something and actually acting it out. Sure, physically beating a woman is a terrible thing to do, but it does no good to deny that violent impulses exist within you. When you begin the process of repression and disowning aspects of your personality, you start a war with yourself, and that leads to misery and depression. Is that what most men do? They deny that they have these masculine impulses to be in control and to be dominant? Yes, and even worse than that, they instantly shame any impulse they have in that direction as dirty, sinful, and wrong. So, is this why the dominant-submissive dynamic is so popular? Because it's taboo? Well, in a sense, yes. Men intuitively understand that they have this aspect to their personality, and they're driven by an unconscious desire to integrate all aspects of themselves. That's why they seek out a partner who will willingly play the role of the submissive woman, the slave, the one who will follow all of the sexual orders issued by her male partner. So men want to find a woman who's okay with being ordered about and spanked, whipped, that sort of thing. Even if she's crying and protesting, he wants a woman who will submit to him and allow him to have his way with her. Not exactly. It's a common misconception from people not familiar with BDSM that the men must enjoy how difficult it is for the woman, that they get turned on by watching the woman suffer. It's actually the opposite. What makes the experience so arousing is that the women are enjoying themselves. Are you saying that women enjoy being ordered about, spoken down to, that sort of thing? Definitely. I'm not saying all women, but it's not an uncommon fantasy for women to be treated as a sex slave by their partner. Now, the reasons why a woman would enjoy that are very complex, and I won't go into them in this video. Maybe we can talk about that another time. What is important to know is that the reason that men enjoy the dominant-submissive dynamic, the reason why they find it so arousing, is that the women are willing participants. But how can you be so sure? How can you know that it's the fact that women are enjoying it that makes it so appealing? I'll explain the psychology in just a moment, but if you're looking for evidence, just look at pornography. The amount of films that depict women as miserable and hating the experience is very small, because that only appeals to a very specific niche. The vast majority of pornography films picture women loving the experience, encouraging the man, smiling, enjoying it, lost in pleasure. But if men want to see women being overpowered by a display of raw masculinity, why is it important that the women are enjoying themselves? Because what men want to see is that that part of themselves is acceptable, is lovable. They want to see a woman who will happily submit to his dominance because that validates him. He's not some guilty, shameful creature racked with toxic masculinity. He's a normal and natural man, and when he freely indulges his sexual desires, women respond positively. So what would happen if the woman was to respond negatively? If she met his attempts to establish some kind of dominance in the bedroom by shaming or criticizing him, he'd feel crushed. It would confirm his worst fears that he's some kind of sick pervert, a closet misogynist. If she responded in that way, he would quickly lose his erection because it's impossible to feel aroused when you feel unsafe. You've spoken about this before, about how a feeling of safety is a necessary precondition for arousal. That's right. So imagine a man whose deepest fear is that he's some sexist, violent creep who wants to turn all women into sex slaves. Imagine how reassured he will feel when he shares his sexual desire with a partner and she responds positively, with encouragement and enthusiasm. Suddenly, that intense fear turns into a deep feeling of safety, and with that comes arousal. So basically, this is all about disproving his negative beliefs about himself. As I've said before, human sexuality is extremely complex, and every individual is different. We're just talking in a general sense, but on the whole, yes, men want to feel like their deepest held desires are normal, natural, and lovable. But BDSM is an extremely varied practice. Everyone has their own specific kinks and fetishes. How do you account for that? It's all about the individual, what their particular beliefs are, where they feel their deepest insecurities lie. Some men will enjoy slapping and spanking women, others might enjoy dirty talk. It's all about the individual. I think lots of people would find it useful to go through each of these acts and explain the psychological appeal behind each one. No problem, we can do that. So, using the example that you already mentioned, why would some men prefer being physical with a woman while others would prefer something like dirty talk? Well, imagine a man who believes that women are pure angelic creatures, the fairer sex who need to be protected at all costs. It would be the height of sin and immorality to ever hit a woman. Now, Imagine how safe and aroused he would feel if he was to spank, whip, or slap his partner and she responded positively to the experience. What a powerful affirmation that would be for him. And what about the man who prefers to talk down to women? Well, unconsciously, he probably feels like one of the worst acts that you can commit is to insult a woman, to objectify her. If he calls her a useless whore, a filthy slut, a sex toy, whatever it may be, he's committing one of the worst acts imaginable. That's why seeing her enjoy it or even participate in the dirty talk is so arousing. So, following this logic, a man who feels like it's a terrible thing to do to order a woman around will enjoy ordering a woman around. That's right. You do the thing that you feel most ashamed of because it's in the overcoming of that shame that there's the most powerful experience of pleasure. But what's important to remember here is how arousal is linked to safety. When you understand that, so many of the strange acts of BDSM start to make sense. You talk about safety a lot, but I'm not really clear why it's such a big deal. Are people generally walking around feeling unsafe? When it comes to issues of women and sexuality, definitely. I wouldn't say that calm confidence is the emotion most commonly associated with men's sexual experiences with women. I'd say it's more likely to be fear and insecurity. In other words, the opposite of safety. Fear is quite a strong word to use. In what circumstances would a man be frightened of a woman? Unless you've done a lot of self-work and reached that stage of psychological autonomy where you don't look to other people to validate you, then women will have a strong power over you because they can confirm or deny your desirability. It will feel as though they can judge your worth as a man. You mean men fear women because they're scared of being rejected or criticized? Yes, but mostly they're scared of what that rejection would signify, which is their low self-worth as a man. A lot of BDSM activities are designed to combat this fear, to create conditions and scenarios that would either directly disprove negative self-beliefs or establish such controls that it's impossible for those fears to come into fruition. What would be an example of this? Okay, so imagine a man who is terrified that women will reject him. In his sex life, he likes to play out a fantasy where the woman is completely submissive and obedient. She's his slave and she has to do exactly what he says. In that scenario, he feels completely safe because she's not allowed to reject or refuse him. Because it's against the rules. Exactly. She has to do what he says or else she gets punished or something. The details don't matter. Each couple will come up with their own specific dynamic. But what's important to know is that whatever rules they create will be there to make him feel safe, which is a necessary precondition for his arousal. Is this the same reason why some men will get turned on by tying women up with ropes and chains? Sort of, yes. This man will feel safe because the woman is utterly dependent upon him. She's tied up and she's under his control. So, for a man who fears that a woman will leave him or hurt him in some way, having her completely restricted in her movement will definitely make him feel safe. What about gagging women so they can't speak? Well, you can imagine that that sort of thing would appeal to a man who fears that women will criticize him. If a man's frightened of what a woman might say about him, what better way to establish a feeling of safety than actually removing her ability to speak? And what about blindfolds? Is that appealing to men who don't want women to look at them? Kind of, yes. A lot of these things can just be an extenuation of the power game, exerting control over a woman because it makes you feel safe to be the one in charge. However, the reason why something like a blindfold might be specifically appealing is perhaps you're ashamed of your appearance and it makes you feel safe to take away the woman's ability to see you. So, if he thinks that he's ugly and he's scared that he's going to see disappointment in her eyes, he removes that danger by blindfolding her. Yes, and this is what people who criticize male sexuality as sexist or the result of toxic masculinity don't understand. I would argue that they have a vested interest in not understanding it. Why would they not want to understand the psychology of male sexuality? Because it doesn't fit their narrative. They want to paint men as secret sexists who believe in male supremacy and that their sexual preferences are proof that they think that women are inferior beings who should just be sex slaves. But like you said, lots of men do have that fantasy. But the reason that they're so appealing is because men don't feel powerful. These fantasies of control and dominance are born from feelings of fear and insecurity. Men are frightened of women, frightened of being criticized, frightened of being shamed or rejected or made to feel guilty. And that's why they create these elaborate fantasy scenarios, to find a place, at least in their imagination, where they can feel safe. From that perspective, it paints a picture of men in this culture quite different from some all-powerful oppressive patriarchy. This is what male sexual preferences reveal to us, that men feel disempowered in this culture, or at the very least, scared and guilty about exercising any power. It doesn't really matter what the conscious mind claims to believe, our sexuality always reveals the raw truth about our beliefs. But there are some men in this culture who are genuinely powerful, like the CEOs or the politicians. I'm sure they don't feel disempowered. But some of them may feel guilty about exercising that power, and they'll still need to find release in their sexual fantasies. It shouldn't surprise you to know that it's those type of men who most frequently fantasize about being dominated by women. You mean like a dominatrix? Exactly. These men order people around all day and potentially feel guilty about that. Unconsciously, they're worried about exercising their power because they're scared they might be hurting people. And so they create elaborate fantasies where they're the ones tied up, insulted, ordered around, because at least in those fantasy scenarios, it can be guaranteed that they're not the ones hurting someone. Which means that they'll feel safe, and like you've said many times now, a feeling of safety is a necessary precondition for arousal. Exactly. And this holds true no matter what the fantasy is. In this video, we haven't been able to cover every particular kink or fetish within the Bdsm umbrella, but if you understand the principle, then you can figure it out yourself. It's a matter of asking, what is it about this act that makes me feel safe? And then looking backwards to see what is the fear or insecurity that's being cured by this particular fantasy. Interesting. Well, I'm sure that anyone who's curious to know why they enjoy a particular sexual act can do that work themselves. Right now, I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say. Do you think it's true that men fantasize about being in control and being empowered in the bedroom because they feel disempowered in their day-to-day life? Do you think that certain sexual acts have an appeal because they prevent certain fears and insecurities from being triggered? Let us know in the comment section below. Also, be sure to hit that like button and make sure you subscribe to the channel. If you watch Red Pill interviews on a regular basis and you feel like you want to support the creator, the best way you can do that is through my Patreon page. There's a link in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll catch you again next time.